Hi everyone. I'm James. I'm a engineering student, and I'm working on RF. That's kind of my key interest, and merges quite well with hacking. So Sigint, or signals intelligence, is basically signals all around us, on analog and digital. Information they contain, what we can learn from them, and then breaking things you're not supposed to, which is very much what cybersecurity is about. So uses of RF, we have communication, so people talking to each other, aircraft communicating, satellite internet. If anybody didn't hear as well, Starlink is apparently down at the minute. There was a big crash, so there's a major satellite internet provider. So navigation, so GNSS, which includes all of the major positioning system constellations, that uses RF, sends timing signals down to Earth. VOR, which is an older one, which is essentially allows aircraft to navigate using kind of ground-based radio beacons. I don't know to what extent that's still used. Astronomy, so radio telescopy, so I'm sure you've heard of like James Webb Space Telescope, and seeing all those absolutely massive satellite dishes, especially scattered around the United States. There's Hawaii and Australia. There's some really big ones where they can kind of look far into the cosmos and do whatever astronomers do. Imaging, so medical imaging is particularly useful. So things like MRI machines that uses RF, CT scans, all of that, and radar, which stands for radio detection and ranging. So figuring out distance and speed of things. Essentially, just bounce radio waves off things, and that can tell you a lot, and both actively and passively. And cooking. So you have microwaves at home. That is also RF. Some people split it into RF and microwave, but they're very much one and the same things. Spectrums are right next to each other. But I will tell you why cooking is not nearly as dangerous as cell towers, as part of the later part of the talk, if you were curious. So the first part of this is kind of a bit of a physics lesson. I'll keep it short and simple. You don't need to know much to be dangerous in radio. And you definitely don't need to do an engineering course to understand and practice a lot of the things that I'm going to teach you. So in radio, you have frequency of signal, so kind of from a couple of kilohertz to many gigahertz for like some of the latest and newer technologies. It's all RF. When you have a high frequency, it is a low wavelength. So kind of just different ways of describing the same thing. So for example, a 100 megahertz signal, which is where you might like hear your kind of driving radio, the standard FM, we'd call that, for example, the 2 meter band, because the distance between the waves is 2 meters. When you have a high frequency, you can have smaller antenna, which is why some of the high frequencies are very attractive to put in like cell phones and such like. And also you'll notice if you ever see like a big broadcast radio transmitting tower, they have very, very big, like especially for like AM radio, very big transmitters. I think the biggest of which is the Vatican radio station, where they broadcast Vatican interest radio channels all around the world with maximum coverage at absolutely incredible powers. So the signals themselves, they can be characterized by the frequency of them. So here we have a low frequency signal in red, and then blue frequency is twice that. So you can see there's twice as many oscillations in the same period of time. Then amplitude, so a signal is blue one's taller, so that can be adjusted in radio wave. And then phase, so kind of the offset between two signals as well. And essentially for all purposes of modern radio, those are the three things which you can adjust and will propagate through the air to transfer information, either in analog or digital methods. So, the radio spectrum. So these are the really low frequencies. So I'm not actually quite sure how big, but it would be absolutely massive, probably almost the length of a country, if you wanted a kind of on the low end of that spectrum radio setup. They mostly use that to talk to submarines and for a bit of science, because submarines being so far underwater, it's quite hard to reach them with conventional radio signals. They haven't yet extended 5G to the bottom of the ocean, and it doesn't penetrate through water very well. Then we get on to kind of the low, and that's extremely low frequency, super low frequency, ultra low frequency, very low frequency, and then low frequency, medium frequency. That's where kind of the first thing which you may have used comes in, which is AM broadcast radio. So also known as like long wave radio, gets very far across many countries, as well as some navigation, medical aid, and also RFID. So some RFID cards, like entry access cards, you will use that due to some kind of tricks. I don't know too much about how those antennas work. HF. So that's where you get your kind of first radio. So I don't know if people know about CB radio. So it's like truckers in movies, truckers talking to each other. That's American consumer band radio, CB. And that's where some of the, and also quite an interesting kind of radar technology where you can bounce signals off of the ionosphere and then, see things which are over the horizon. So which you can't see by light or any other means. And that is still done. VHF, this is kind of the first band of interest I'm going to be looking in more detail today, and it's quite easy to work with. So that the first thing in there is kind of your broadcast radio, so standard 97.5 FM, whatever. That's that range. Aircraft and air traffic control also talk on those frequencies. Some maritime and some kinds of walkie-talkies as well, specifically kind of outdoor variety, long-range sites, use things in that band. The main band interest, which we're going to be looking at today, so that's the ultra-high frequency band, that contains cellular, radar, microwaves, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, basically most of the tech that we use at the minute, unless you're getting into kind of the high band cellular and parts, which is super high frequency. And that's all the ones. It does extend a bit further, but that's really then just goes into the science again, because we don't have particularly good technology for that. And 3 to 30 gigahertz is used for some high throughput microwave links, for getting to, for satellite internet uplinks, etc. And microwave relay, which is an interesting technology, often used by high-frequency traders in kind of the financial sector to get information as fast as they can between exchanges. At least that was the traditional way. They're kind of getting to the laying their own fiber lines and things at the minute as well. And more radar. And that's specifically weather radar. So all kind of weather forecasts based on sending these high-frequency radio waves out into the atmosphere. And seeing how they reflect off rain, clouds, moisture, and so forth. The one last bit of science which you should be aware of to kind of mess with radio is how the engineers mark kind of gain and power of the system. As you can see here, we have gains given in decibels, dB, and power given dBm, which stands for decibel milliwatts, or dBW, decibel watts, less frequently used. So you can see it's kind of compressed scale. So the most, it's based on logarithms, but the most important thing to know is that when you add 3 dB, you're multiplying by 2. When you add 10 dB, you're multiplying by 10. So it gives you quite a lot of kind of power and magnitude. You're a lot less accurate than that, but when you're talking about signals and power ratings, very important. So, for example, in power, while your phone might be transmitting at 40 dBm to a cell tower, your home microwave is running more like at 70 dBm. So it doesn't seem that far away on the scale, but that's a lot of power difference, because that's like 1 watt versus 1,000 watts. Relevant legislation. So the legislation in England is a bit dated on what you're allowed to do and not do on radio. So you need licenses to transmit. It's all regulated by Ofcom, Office of Communications. Technically, listening also requires permission. You're not meant to listen to signal not intended for you. It is technically an offence, but there have been absolutely zero recorded cases, especially given how popular and common radio hardware has been over the last many years for the case. A lot of those laws were dated from like original GSMs, cell phones, where you could technically listen to people's phone calls and directly invading their privacy just with a kind of basic handheld radio, which is not the case anymore. I feel like I should remind people, technically an offence, especially when you're doing legal work, it's quite important to play by the rules. And in the UK, it's not necessarily the Crown Prosecution Service who can take you to court for stuff. So, but more importantly, probably divulging information that you weren't meant to hear, even if you're using the radio in a kind of a perfectly legal way. If you then go write about it online, so on, technically not allowed as well. It's quite dated, and I think it's due to change fairly soon. But it's just one of those things. And then Communications Act. So Ofcom, Office of Communications, they manage radio spectrum. They investigate cases of interference. There's some recently where people were interfering with air traffic control, putting out things they're not meant to. They absolutely will notice and care and take action, take you to court, take you to prison, and still probably most sadly confiscate all your equipment if they do find you to breach some of these regulations. So, kind of, what is there to be heard on in the VHF UHF range, which is sort of equipment that we'll look at later that you can hear some of these. So, analog, there's air traffic control, which is an amplitude modulated signal. There's the maritime communications bands, off-the-shelf walkie-talkies, which you can just buy kind of anywhere. The kind of like blister pack walkie-talkies, which you can get, talk on, use license-free. Those fall into a category called PMR 446, where technically the radio holds a license. You don't need one. Businesses, they love using analog radio for things, so things like Wetherspoons, pub watch steam that you can sometimes hear. Construction crews will be using analog radios. They are a lot cheaper than digital radios, but not necessarily always more secure. So that's key uses for that. Digital radios, kind of larger sites. So if you had like a campus security, they'd probably be using digital radios with a repeater. You can cover a larger area. You can do fancier things, and you can split people up into groups. So you don't need to lease massive amounts of spectrum to run an entire site. The reason I put these in orange is because you can't always hear these. So it really depends what kind of system they're using. But eavesdropping is definitely harder on the digital side, but technology has advanced and caught up with it with some of the equipment that I'll show later. Railways are also a user of that. The reason it's orange, not red, is because I think technically you can snoop on that. It is scrambled, but not encrypted. Emergency services. So you might have heard of Tetra Airwave. It's kind of like a private 2G, 3G network in some ways for the police, ambulance, fire service of their handheld radios and their car radios. That is very encrypted, and even though you might have heard some things about kind of Tetra burst and vulnerabilities in Tetra, that covers radios meant for export. So in the handheld radio world, there is quite a lot of espionage, especially around what radios are allowed to be exported out of the country, because it's often felt that a military should be able to snoop on these channels, especially if they get into hands of kind of adversaries and so on. So the tetraburst vulnerabilities were based around the kind of the lower tiers of Tetra systems, which were allowed to be sold overseas and had an intentionally kind of gimped crypto system. As far as I know, there's no vulnerabilities in the Tetra airway that would actually disclose information to you unless you have one of the kind of pre-programmed handsets. And then really constant places, so places which need to be compliant to FIPS, FIPS and etc., and are actually audited based on their site security. I don't know; it's not known too much about that, but you can get radios which are properly secure. So analog voice, some of the kind of interesting open channels, and some places are using these by accident. So technically, use it as a business, not meant to use PM446, which is the commercial off-the-shelf radios. People do because they kind of just pick up whatever. So that's why I included cheapskates in there as well. But you are very likely to be listened to by people with just commercial off-the-shelf radios that they can pick up. They might also transmit over you, mess with you. I've definitely seen lots of cases of that. And hikers, kind of scouts, people, outdoor people will tend to use radios like that. Then there's kind of the business simple licensing, where you can, where you kind of pay a fixed fee every year, and that opens up a certain amount of channels which you're then licensed to use. Then you buy special radios which you can use this with. That's a bit more common for big businesses. And then site licenses, when you want to have a repeater access network across campus, that's kind of critical at that point. And you can actually see those people with site licenses and point-to-point radio licenses in Ofcom's online map, which is actually really interesting. So this is kind of the Ofcom God view that they just published to the internet. So you can kind of look up by region. So I chose Basing, so you can't really see the dots too much on this, but you can see that the National Trust has a radio license. It lists all of their frequencies that they have that they're renting. So the sports club, the Basic College of Technology, and Airwave as well, which is the police network that I talked about. But that's so that they can link between sites. And in the case of power outage, they can still keep the police radios going between different places without internet, anything else. So that's quite an interesting page. You can kind of see a bit of a OSINT where you can see who's using radios and where in your local area, which is all free to publish information. So go on a bit to more kind of info security stuff. So if you have a business, you work with businesses that are using kind of standard business radios, it is probably unencrypted. If they're just using it off the shelf, they don't have kind of a exceptionally competent kind of site management team, etc. So no encryption, I'd say, is just the worst, because people with kind of with radio scanners will just find your channels and listen to you, transmit over you, and generally mess with you in ways they can. It happens quite frequently. Not as much as it used to happen before Netflix, let's say, when this was kind of a much more entertaining hobby. Basic privacy, which Motorola offers, is free, but it is a 16-bit XOR mask. It can be cracked and very, very quickly. But then again, it's kind of the equipment to know what you do. So if you were buying a digital radio scanner, it probably wouldn't be able to do that. But with new techniques, kind of on SDRs, it's easy as is. Enhanced privacy mode, it's 40 bits. you're allowed to export that. You can crack that with good computers and bits if you know what you're doing, at least as far as I understand. Those aren't all security bits, I think. And you have to pay £50 per radio. So if you have a site of 500 radios, that's already quite a big ask for a budget for these. And then you get on to kind of the actual good radios. It's AES privacy that Motorola offers. It's export control, so you can't always take these out of the country. I think things like that are loosening up a bit now, but and that's also FIPS compliant. So if you have a site which has those regulations, and that's £300 per radio. And this is in addition to radios that cost about £600 each. So that's quite a big spend, but it's not a subscription. You pay that. The radio has the software key. You can use it forever. And then when you have the larger sites, base stations, the cost for base stations that support that, repeater networks, those go across the board as well. So having a site as secure as your normal network is very, very expensive for kind of just normal walkie-talkie talk radios, whatever. And a lot of the time, I'm not sure where this comes in kind of GDPR compliance if you have to transmit sensitive data between places, but because you have to use strong technical measures to make sure that personal information isn't divulged. So technically, as a bit of a grey area, it might come out that you actually need AES encrypted radios if you're doing that. Baofeng UV5R. So this is the first kind of piece of scanning equipment that I'll talk about. So it can do a lot of analog voice. So it has access to the 2 meter and 70 centimeters bands, which are another name for the VHF and UHF bands. Not all of them, but the points where some interesting things are, including some weather satellites, which kind of continuously record images and then ping them back down at quite that you can then decode for the sound with an app on your phone, which is pretty cool in my opinion. You can also receive broadcast FM if you want to do that, but it's dead cheap. It's like £17. You can get them anywhere. These radios can transmit, but that is for radio amateurs. So even if you were technically on a band which is more license-free, technically this radio doesn't come with a license for anything. So you need the license. But then again, it's this is kind of mainly for talk about listening kind of signals intelligence. But amateur radio is a really good way to learn about this stuff without kind of going to the effort of doing a degree, etc. Then another radio, which is a bit more enhanced, has some frequencies, has some extra frequencies, and it can also receive air traffic control and airband, and has a much wider receiving frequencies for about £25. I don't know how they make these radios so cheap. It really boggles the mind. But onward. So the next kind of band that I want to talk about is ISM band, which is instrumentation, scientific, and medical, which comprises kind of 3 bands across UHF and up, which you'll be much more familiar with. So 433, 868, you have car keys. So these are like when you unlock your car remotely, it has the rolling codes, which I've just there's rumours at the minute that there's a really, really big vulnerability in some rolling code systems for modern cars that allow a single packet to be captured and then lock and unlock capability for your car is compromised, technically. But that's unverified. Like garage door openers, etc., those have kind of long been discussed. So sending basic digital packets between each other. LoRa, which I think somebody else is doing, which is what Meshtastic runs on. It's kind of the low modulation protocol that can be used at like really low power for Internet of Things, in kind of especially across wide areas, and smart meters. 2.4 Zigbee is quite an interesting one. You can listen to a fair amount of what goes on, although the content is encrypted, but it will tell you if somebody has a very fancy smart home. And if somebody has a very fancy smart home, that's intelligence in itself. That might be a person worth robbing, for example, maybe. And so drone command and control. So when people have kind of DJI and other drones, the controller linked to that will usually be in that band, can be listened to. Some people buy baby monitors that are insecure. I mean, wow. Did they really not consider that? It seems like a fairly critical part of it. And a lot of those can be listened to without encryption. I think nowadays it's more kind of Wi-Fi ones that you get. But the traditional ones, same system as cordless phones, could just be listened to over the network. And cordless phones still are. They run their own protocols, sometimes fairly unencrypted. So you can still listen to, it's called DECT, the technology that those run on, which is sometimes encrypted, sometimes not. And microwave ovens, they also run on 2.4 GHz, but they have that kind of mesh screen in front that protects you. And then the rest of things, so like Wi-Fi 5 GHz, CCTV, presence detection, so like some places when you walk into a room and the lights will turn on, that will actually be 5 GHz waves bouncing off of you, telling it that there's somebody in the room. And this is also quite common for first-person video relay from drones, which is very, very interesting topic in signals intelligence at the minute, with the war in Ukraine and everything that's happening. Jamming video relay signals is a really big topic at the minute, and it's quite easy to do as well. So they're looking at switching to like digital, putting as many countermeasures as they can, and using kind of fiber optic lines to run the RF over instead. Software-defined radio. So this is kind of the best way. So the previous ones I showed, those are just kind of analog, handheld FM receivers, but these are the best you can do. They're basically like a sound card for radio for your computer, if you're old enough to remember what a separate sound card is for a computer. And they're kind of like a external modem as well. So some of them, this is the kind of the most basic but pretty versatile. It's an RTL SDR. Somebody just found some parts that they could kind of hack apart and build a software-defined radio out of. Then, very famous among hackers in the cybersecurity circles, the HackerF, which is kind of a mid-range SDR, and very wide bandwidth, can be used for a lot of things. And then at the top is like a professional lab-grade SDR, which costs a lot of money. So these capture radio waves and store them as digital signals. Then this can be digitally processed on your computer. So if you're trying to demodulate either analog or digital signals, it can all nowadays be done quite a bit better and with a lot less headache using software-defined radio technologies, I say, but the drives are hell. So, but there is a solution to that later in the talk. And down on the left here, you can see a spectral waterfall. So one of the big advantages of an SDR is that you can see all the bandwidth at once that you're looking for. So whereas on like a handheld scanner, you might have to chew through things one by one, at very specific frequencies, you can see the entire bandwidth of your receiver all in one go, and you can see kind of the trails of where the signal spikes were in frequency falling down the screen, which is very useful for finding things in the local area. Dragon OS. So for those of you who know Kali Linux and so on, Dragon OS is the Kali Linux of for software-defined radio, really. So all of the radio tools, all of the radio drivers, most importantly, are all included, as well as hundreds of tools which you need for doing anything with an SDR, which can be quite a challenge in some cases. They actually also have some tools in there for self-power security research and emulation, which you can do with some of the professional-grade SDRs that I showed in the last slide. But really good, available as ISOs, so and you can run it in a VM, you can run it wherever. It's kind of a Debian-based Kali clone just for SDRs. So this is some of the software which will be useful if you're getting started with SDRs. So there is GQRX, which is basically the most basic. It will give you a spectrum waterfall of what you can see in a band. So, for example, you'd see like a digital signal kind of jumping up and down, for example, that you can see there's some very narrow bands, things in there. And you might see an FM voice or a FM radio station. You'd see that kind of wiggling about because that's an analog signal. Which can tell you a lot about the signals that you're looking at, their power levels relative to you, so how well you're receiving them, which will help you kind of set up antennas properly, and so on. And that can also let you hear analog signals. So you can kind of drag the slider onto a signal, demodulate it, listen to what it sounds like. Even if it's a digital signal, you can still kind of down convert it to audio frequency and hear what it's doing. So kind of like how you'd hear like modem noise, something like that. You kind of just hear the beeps and words, what's going on behind it, and you might even learn to identify stuff based on that. And then the next one is SDR Angel. That's a really, really powerful bit of software. It does have a memory leak, I think, so it crashes sometimes, but you have full spectrum waterfall, but it can do digital signals as well. So if you're demodulating, you're listening to like a DMR station, obviously one which you're broadcasting licensed to receive, you can hear that decoded in there. It works quite well for those, not perfectly, because of some reasons I'll get to on the next bit of software. And no encrypted radio signals, but it's generally quite a powerful bit of software, very capable. It can also do transmitting. So like if you want to do, in a licensed way, transmit some like Morse code and things, it has a whole variety of tools to do that. DSD FME, Florida Man Edition. This is probably my favorite tool out of everything at the minute. So everything which you need for kind of digital radio, it will tell you all the packets it's receiving. It can kind of tap into like large radio networks when you're listening to something there. It has the Motorola basic privacy keys built in, so you can see everything that you can. And I reckon it could be used with enhanced privacy tracking, but that's obviously with some off-site compute because you need to crack that 40-bit key as well. And the reason why this one's so much better as well is because they don't care about the proprietary codecs, which a lot of radios use. So there's this thing called AMBE, and it's a very restrictively licensed codec for encoding voice. So a lot of implementations are very bad, but they just straight up included a stolen proprietary implementation in their source code, and they don't seem to care. So it works really well, and you'll hear everything with like crystal clear quality. It's a very good tool. RTL SDR, so I covered this briefly. This is the best way to get started, in my opinion. If you just want to plug it in, get going, see some signals in the waterfall, adjust your antenna, and then kind of start comparing and seeing what's available to you. A lot of people, when they have some cash to spend, they've gone and bought like a hack RF, and they just don't know what to do with it. It's a fairly expensive bit of kit, and the learning curve is so much higher for a lot of the more advanced things that a hack RF is capable of compared to an RTL SDR. So listening to little things, doing like basic amateur things, you can listen to like aircraft transponders and so on this as well. It covers that really well. And you can actually, in SDR Ranger, which I showed, you can have a map of the area and put aircraft on a map around you based on their ADS-B transponder, essentially. Perfect style of device, definitely. And can also be used to receive satellite things as well, like the NOAA web map images that I was talking about, and some radio amateur satellites have receive frequencies as well that can be seen. Okay, this is a good new radio site. So that's like really advanced DSP software. So if you really want to get into it, you're analyzing signals, you want to get into a bit more kind of the science of trying to understand, extract some more information. It's very powerful, but it is a massive learning curve. I'd say it's like you spend 100 hours and then you're kind of mostly getting to grips with what you do in it. And setting expectations is quite important because it's quite challenging doing digital signal processing software. But there are some absolutely great resources out there to learn on it. The guy who created it, Michael Osmond, he made a brilliant YouTube series basically going through every step of using GNU radio to make basic transmitters and receivers and so on. Mostly kind of like receiving like car keys, demodulating those signals, for example, for some security research. That's a good application of this device. It does cost about £200 for the HackRF, which, GNU Radio is free. Obviously, it's GNU free software. But then, to make the most out of it, I'd recommend at least a HackRF SDR. So you have some room to play with. Any questions? Yes.
So, when you talked about the motor low basic privacy, you said there was 16-bit XOR key, but you said it was 4-bit security. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yes. I think I meant to say 16 different keys, not 16-bit XOR key. So it's in 4 bits of security. Okay. It's a little bit unclear how they do it, and but DSD-FME, the software watcher show, has it all baked in. So they have all of the keys listed out.
All 16.
Yeah, I know. It's a big ask. But the effect that you get in just putting a little bit of security on radios is massive in that people aren't going to try and like jam you and mess with you so much. But hardened criminals and radio amateurs can probably still listen to what you're saying. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Semi-related question. Doing a community-run event, considering some sort of walkie-talkie for the people running it, and thinking second-hand deck function transition. Would you go with that? Something else? Is that something in your wheelhouse?
I mean, yeah, that's to be honest, that's great idea. Nobody's going to do for you with that. So, but if that's what you're worried about,
thinking more the most bang for the least money.
Oh, right. I mean, to be honest, I'd it depends. I'm not too sure about how DEX phones would work in that situation because you need base station fairly close. They're not meant to be particularly high power, so they won't get too far across places wirelessly. But so if that's not, then like a PMR 446, you can get some like the 16-channel PMR 446 radios quite cheap for like 10, 12, 13 pounds a unit, something like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. They might not sound very nice, but they'll work. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
I know you mentioned that most running fast. I know they're like radio space, but are they like major vendors?
Yeah, absolutely. So in kind of the digital handheld radio space, there is Motorola, Terra. They're quite a High Terra. Sorry. They're another big player in that. It is really a limited number of people who can cater to that market, and there's really any reason to get into it. Because usually when people have a good reason to pay for good radios, they're going to Motorola, or if they want to save a bit of money, maybe High Terra. I think there just aren't too many players. There are a lot more kind of cheaper alternative kind of white label radios that you can get that support some of these things. China has done a lot of work on kind of making very integrated chipsets for them, and so on.
Are they like Apple Motorola encryption scheme?
Encryption, no, but the modulation and basic talking, yeah. So, At least not any of the higher tiers. Maybe the XL one. I really don't know.
Do you know anything about the new Battlefield digital?
Yes, I actually have one. It's the Battlefield 181 UV. Is that the one you're looking at? Or okay, yeah. But yeah, no, they're pretty good. So their initial stuff was quite poor quality, but their newer things are getting better. If you want to put custom firmware on it, just make sure it's supported, because they've been actually giving the same number, giving the same kind of model number to radios with completely different chipsets. People have been bricking by putting custom firmware on, because why not?
The encryption cracking on the virtual ones is the software that's trying to this is there just some like predictable header that's looking for inside the stream is going that's the right keys codes how it's actually utilizing those keys in terms of right.
I think they have message authentication codes in it. It would all be in they're supposed to look at kind of the DMR standards and the DSE-FME code base, which is on GitHub. I can't answer that question directly, really. But I'm very interested in the kind of the actual layer 2 and 3 of DMR radios. Okay. Any final questions then? Okay. All good. I'll finish shouting.